It was Victor Hugo who proclaimed that it is always in one's letters, more than any other writing, that one finds the imprint of a heart and the traces of a life. Letters offer an intimacy and an authenticity that is unparalleled with any other type of writing. And I want to kick off our Letters for the Ages series with a letter which I find particularly moving, not merely for its capturing of a monumental time in history, but also because of its display of grace, humanity, and the importance of human relationships. Loss. It is a feeling which no human being can avoid and which we all must endure and burden. Few in history knew loss better than First Lady of the United States, Jacqueline Kennedy. At the age of just 10, her parents' divorce left her estranged from her father. She went through what no mother would ever wish to go through, losing not one and not two, but 3 children. Most tragically, losing her baby Patrick after just 39 hours of life. Just 15 weeks later, and Jacqueline was sat next to her husband as he was assassinated in cold blood. It must have felt like a nightmare, like the whole world was caving in on her. But that is precisely what is so remarkable about this letter, written just a week after the dramatic loss of her husband in the most traumatic of circumstances. And it just so happens to be that this is one of the last letters that Jacqueline Kennedy would ever write before drifting out of the public limelight. So who, you might be wondering, in this moment of great pain, in this moment of great sadness, does she choose to write to? Nikita Khrushchev, Premier of the Soviet Union, and the very man who was once her husband's greatest adversary, the very man whose actions during the Cuban Missile Crisis and his fanatical ideological opposition to the United States thrust the world to the brink of nuclear war. At a time when most could have been bitter and resentful, she chose to write to Premier Khrushchev to actually thank him for wishing his condolences on her husband's death, thanking him for rescuing the world from the brink of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis with her husband. Jacqueline remembered all too well the relationship which her husband had fostered with Premier Khrushchev, the lines of communication which were established and which would sustain themselves for the rest of the Cold War. And so, in an effort to cement her husband's legacy, she musters up the courage and the strength and the grace to write to Premier Khrushchev. She writes, "Dear Mr. Chairman President, I would like to thank you for sending Mr. Mikoyan as your representative to my husband's funeral. He looked so upset when he came through the line, and I was very moved. I tried to give him a message for you that day, but as it was such a terrible day for me, I do not know if my words came out as I meant them to. So now, in one of the last nights I will spend in the White House, in one of the last letters I will write on this paper in the White House, I would like to write you my message. I send it only because I know how much my husband cared about peace and how the relation between you and him was central to this care in his mind. You and he were adversaries, but you were allied in a determination that the world should not be blown up. You respected each other and could deal with each other. The danger which troubled my husband was that war might be started not so much by the big men as by the little ones. While big men know the needs for self-control and restraint, little men are sometimes moved by pride and fear. If only in the future the big men can continue to make the little ones sit down and talk before they fight. I send this letter because I know so deeply of the importance of the relationship which existed between you and my husband, and also because of your kindness and that of Mrs. Khrushcheva in Vienna. Please thank her for that. Sincerely, Jacqueline Kennedy. This letter is profound, not just because of the grace which Jacqueline Kennedy shows, but also because of the message which it sends. Pay attention to the wording which Jacqueline Kennedy employs and her talk of big men understanding the need for self-control and restraint. This comes in a historical context in which the Cold War, bitter as it was at that time, was still being waged. Jacqueline Kennedy clearly had a fear for the future state of the world, and she is almost telling Khrushchev here that he should continue to use the kind of behaviour which he employed with her husband, that diplomacy was the way forward rather than war. Then there is the political context. This letter was written at a moment of great pressure when many at the Central Intelligence Agency believed that there was a Soviet role in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But rather than succumb to the pressure, rather than dismiss Khrushchev's letter of condolence, Jacqueline Kennedy remains mindful of the relationship of trust which her husband had built with Premier Khrushchev, and chooses to write him this letter. Lastly, as if closing the door on a chapter of history behind her, Jackie Kennedy reminds us all that it is the connections we build with others which truly matter and sustain themselves long after we are gone. Jacqueline Kennedy with a letter for the ages.